And I think for me, it's about being where the cultural conversation is. And that's what's always interested me. What is the cultural cutting edge? And that's music was that in the 80s and AI is that right now.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research adjacent space is where the real magic happens. To say that today's guest, Sam Steele, is the managing director of a research centre seems like a bit of an understatement. It's true that she is currently heading up the Centre for Creativity Enabled by AI at Bayes Business School, which is part of City University London. But the path that has brought her to that point is long and winding. From music journalist to radio producer and from street food pioneer to the frontiers of AI, Sam has followed where her curiosity takes her, always positioning her at the forefront of the cultural conversation. This is a fascinating conversation which doesn't always follow my usual format, but then Sam hasn't had a particularly conventional career. Listen on to hear her story. Welcome along, Sam. Thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And I wonder if we could begin our conversation with hearing a little bit about what it is that you do.
Well, what I do currently at the moment is I work at Bayes Business School, which is part of City University of London, and I have helped to set up and run a knowledge exchange centre. We're developing tools that help business people to be more creative using AI. So the centre was set up in October 2020, so in the teeth of lockdown. So that was a challenge. And we've been building tools where we codify creative problem solving knowledge and kind of build in processes for creative problem solving and use a lot of the knowledge that we have in the business school. And we were using machine learning and language manipulation long before ChatGPT turbocharged the whole sector, but it has turbocharged the whole sector. So the interest has become massive in the last 12 months, which is quite exciting.
It's really interesting to hear that this AI and machine learning in creativity is something that's existed for a while, because my knowledge of it begins and ends with ChatGPT pretty much.
Well, it's the research work of the professor who won the funding to set up the research centre. So Professor Neil Maiden, he's Professor of Digital Creativity at Bayes. So his research has always been around how you can use computer systems to support human creativity. So he was dabbling in all of this stuff or working on projects for at least the last 5, if not 10 years. So it's all sort of come together. And that's part of the reason that I was interested in this research centre and get involved, because I am not an academic. I have never been an academic. I left school at 18. I'm entirely, self-educated. I've scrabbled my way through the jobs that I've done. And generally just been guided by a question of, is this interesting to me? And I had gone to Bayes actually to do a master's, an MBI, if you like, a master's in business innovation. And the master's degree was innovation, creativity and leadership. And I did it because at the age of 55, I was in a position where I had a bit of money in the bank, and I'd always promised myself when I left school I would have a university experience. So I thought, now's my chance. I'm going to go back to university and see what it's like. So I did this master's degree, and at the end of the degree, they were setting up this centre, and I quite enjoyed being in an academic environment. And having been in the commercial space since I was 18, I enjoyed the pursuit of intellectual conversations. I enjoyed the fact that people were generally quite respectful of each other's ideas. At the level that I was at by the time I went to do my master's degree, now I was a director of communications for a large international company. I was the UK director of communications. And it was nice, it was refreshing not to be in a large company environment where there was politics at play and, aggressive meetings where, and listen, there's a lot of money at stake. People get aggressive and there's a lot of, that's a load of old bollocks, we're doing this, I think your idea's shit. It was just nice to be in an environment where people went, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let me offer you a build, as opposed to, nothing, and my very first experience of the workplace, one of my early experiences was when I was writing for the NME, the New Musical Express, which younger readers won't know, but it was a weekly music paper.
I remember it well.
We used to wait for it to come out every Wednesday because it was the only place you could read about your favourite bands.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to write for it. I was in an editorial meeting and there was a lot of passion around, whether it was rock music or indie or hip hop. And there would be a lot of argument in the editorial meeting every Monday about who was going to be on the cover. And one of the journalists was so cross that his band that he'd been championing wasn't going to make the cover. He literally kicked a hole in the door on his way out. But that was normal for us, because you had to champion your bands. And so I've been used to working in really passionate, aggressive male workspaces. And I really like the genteel atmosphere of the academic class. So I've quite enjoyed being in academia for the last couple of years.
That's really interesting, that comparison, because I'm sure as you've been in this academic world now, you've heard of some of the conversations and things about research culture, and people often do talk about the research world as being very competitive, but clearly it's just on a different scale to what you've experienced elsewhere.
Listen, there are politics in universities, and it is a difficult environment, I think, because of the way that academia is set up. The only way to progress your career as an academic is to publish lots of papers, to speak at lots of events, to get all the glory. So it's not really set up as a team sport, because there's no benefit to people to sharing the glory. That won't get them their professorship. Once you're at doctorate level, you can only get a professorship if people notice you and you are noticed and you've got X amount of published papers with your name on them. And you need to be the lead writer. So it does kind of promote a solo mindset. That yes, there are teams, but the teams are in service of the leader. They're not madly collaborative. And that's just my observation based on 3 years. So, it's only one anecdotal observation. But the people are generally respectful of each other's ideas and respectful of their knowledge, even if they're trying to stand on their head to get to their next career stop. I think in the commercial world, it's much more dog eat dog. You have to kill the opposition. You can't respect what they're doing. You've got to stomp all over them to assert mastery. And it's quite an old-fashioned and very, very masculine way of running commerce. And I think it's changing and it will change even more because of AI. I was at a conference last week in Manchester held by Be the Business. And it was about how AI will impact SMEs. And one of the comments that was made was that AI is going to make companies more productive. It speeds stuff up. It takes away a lot of the drudgery. If you imagine the Industrial Revolution, it's like the invention of the tractor. We don't have to dig the fields anymore. We've got a tractor. What we need to make sure of is that we're sitting on the tractor driving it. We're not carrying the tractor on our backs and it's driving us. That's what we've got to be careful of. But it will make businesses more productive. It will free up time for people in the workplace to do things differently. But differently leads to innovation, and companies are not set up to be innovative. Whether you have a culture in your company that allows new ways of working, new ideas to come through, is going to be the key that turns the lock, that ensures whether you survive this really fast moving industrial revolution that's happening. And so the psychology of the workplace and how you build psychological safety is something I'm really interested in, and is part and parcel of the AI revolution, because we have to ensure the workplace is ready to move fast.
Yeah, and humans are often not very good at dealing with change, especially when it comes very quickly. So I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts around the AI things, or the kind of ideas that are coming out from the academics you're working with. What's maybe the best case scenario? I think we hear a lot of the doom and gloom about how AI is going to take everybody's jobs and take over the world. What's maybe the best case scenario about what you think AI could achieve?
To answer your first question about how the academic world is thinking about AI, there's two schools of thought that are emerging. And one is human plus AI, which is that AI is there to augment the humans, and the humans should be in the middle of it and in control of it. And the other is AI minus human. And AI minus human is what OpenAI and ChatGPT has been criticised for being. Because once the human has put the query in to the chatbot, it then does all the thinking and presents you back with an answer. And you don't know quite how it's arrived at that answer, because we don't know what it's been trained on. It's not easy to see the algorithmic processes that are happening in the background. So that kind of AI minus human thinking is where all the angst is sitting at the moment. What we really focus on is human plus AI. So all of the tools that we're building, it's very easy to see where the information is coming from, how it's being manipulated, and at every stage, the human is in control. The human will, in our case specifically, will type a challenge that they're struggling with into the AI. The AI will then ask it a question.
Right.
And it's designed to offer creative problem-solving prompts, how to create more ideas. Have you thought about this? So at every stage, the human is being asked to co-create the solution. The AI is simply utilising its vast knowledge of creative problem-solving processes, like a double diamond process, a scamper process. We know what these heuristic processes are, and we program them in, and you can see them, but it just saves you having to sit in a room with a facilitator and 3 other people and a whiteboard. You can do what you would normally do in a brainstorm in an hour or two, you can do in a few minutes with this AI.
Interesting. So almost like a kind of coaching
model
rather than just giving you the answer. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what we need to be aware of, that we use AI to help us to do things more creatively. We don't allow the AI to do all the creative thinking, because actually the human brain is the most advanced creativity tool on the planet, and yes, AI can create music, and it can come up with it can predict new crystals or new atoms or things like that. But there's nothing, I think, that compares to the ability of the human brain to make really abstract, weird, odd comparisons. And that's what we need to lean into now as humans, is our creativity, because that's the hardest thing to program into a mathematical model, basically, because that's all it is a maths model.
I love the idea of leaning into our human weirdness, though. I think that's an excellent scenario. Oh, well, that's such interesting stuff. I feel we should come on to a little bit more of your story, because that is in and of itself really interesting, and one of the reasons why you were suggested as a guest for the podcast. So you've hinted at some of the things that you've done there. So you've written for the NME, you've worked in big companies, you've gone from student to research adjacent. Tell us a bit about how that journey has taken you.
So it is weird where life takes you. I think I'm just at the beginning of this new culture shift. You know, my grandparents had a job at the Kodak factory in Wembley for about 35 years, you know, and they worked on a production line at the Kodak factory in more or less the same jobs for about 35 years. And that's unlikely to happen to our children. You know, we're all going to have these portmanteau careers, and I think I was just an early adopter of the portmanteau career because I always wanted to be where the cultural conversation was. And so, you know, when I was a teenager, we would sit and read the NME and talk about music and the influence that music had, and at that time in the 80s, you know, Culture Club and Eurythmics were redefining this kind of sexual identity conversation. And I remember that Boy George and Annie Lennox were actually banned from America because they didn't know whether they were male or female, and they didn't want them in the country. So there was an awful lot of sexual identity politics. There was Red Wedge, which was a whole group of musicians who put on benefits that were anti-racist. So there was a lot of politicization in music, more so than today.
Yeah.
Because the political cultural debate for young people has moved into other mediums. But at that point, it was music. And we would sit and talk about music, and the boys would dominate the conversation. The older brothers, their opinion always counted. And all the journalists in the NME, bar Julie Birchill, practically were men. And I just thought, I want my voice to be part of this conversation. And I left school at 18 and I got a job. I mean, I was lucky I'm in London. I was born and brought up in London, and I got a job as a receptionist. But through a friend of a friend who said, oh, I know somebody who's an editor, a section editor at the NME, and I begged them to introduce us in a pub. If we all go out to a gig one night, will you introduce me to him? And I met him, and I, you know, told him that I thought indie shoegazing music was rubbish, and they didn't ever review any of the bands that I liked. And I really liked, you know, jazz funk, and I really liked the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I really liked all the music that the NME said was uncool. And I didn't care because I think music should be a broad church. And he said to me, I think to shut me up, fine, go and review a band, give me 500 words by Monday. The editor was Steve Lamacq, who you might know from Six Music.
Yeah.
And I remember handing in, you know, my typewritten piece of paper, because it was before the internet. And he read it. He said to me, come on, let's go to the pub. And he went through my review. He said, I like the way you've written this, but it should be there. I can see the point you're making, but you need to put it. And he literally taught me how to write a review. And then he said, go away and rewrite it. And if you can get it back to me by tomorrow morning, as we've discussed it, I'll print it. And he really supported me. That was the first time somebody in the workplace had really taken the time to show me something. And he did it because he knew they needed more girls on the NME. I think he thought I was a bit gobby. And so I ended up then regularly writing for the NME, and Steve and I have become really great friends. And in fact, when he went to Radio 1 to present the evening session, he's quite passionate about music, and he was taking that NME, you know, argue hard and loud and get your bands on, and he had a bit of a reputation as being difficult to manage. And his producers, he went through producers quite quickly. And he called me up one day and said, would you come and produce the evening session? Would you be interested in that? And at that point, I'd been freelancing as a music journalist. I'd worked on TV programs. And I said, I don't really know anything about radio. He said, yeah, but you know about music and you know about me, and that's all I need. And so I went for the interview, I got the job, and Steve and I worked together really happily on the evening session because we were both passionate about music. And so I didn't care when he shouted or he raised his voice, or because I knew it was coming from a place of passion and not because he was just being aggressive. I mean, it probably wasn't a great way to behave in the workplace, but, you know, we were sort of young Turks. He had a brilliant ear for music. And we had a lot of fun working on the evening session. And then my career sort of progressed in Radio 1, and I learned a lot because the BBC is a teaching organisation. It really invests a lot of time teaching leadership skills. And I think they work it out at the BBC that of your salary, about 20% of your time will be spent on a course learning, getting better at what you do.
Oh, that's really positive. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, but I became quite frustrated at the BBC because they teach you all this stuff about creativity and program making, but then it's a very big organisation, so you want to make changes, but it's again, the BBC has this policy or that rule, and you can't do it like that. And so it felt really frustrating to be in an organisation where, on the one hand, they encourage you and teach you to be creative and think really hard about what your audiences want, and then they sort of say, yeah, but we can't do that yet. It might take us a year to be able to do that because we don't have the right policies for it or whatever. And then I was poached to go and head up Channel 4's. Channel 4 were going to launch radio in 2007. And they were going to launch a youth station and a news station to rival Radio 1 and Radio 4. And they had actually got a guy called Bob Shannon to head it up, and Bob used to run 5 Live, Radio 5 Live, and he went on actually to become head of the BBC. But we spent a year, which was almost like doing a postgrad course on, if you were going to set up a new radio station in the UK in 2007, how would you do it? And we had this we did loads of research and brainstorming and thinking outside the box, and how you might make a multi-platform radio station that people could listen to on their phones, on their desktops, miles ahead of the game. But then the big economic crash happened in 2008, and Channel 4 just completely shut down any operation that wasn't central to TV. It just really couldn't justify financing a new venture in a non-TV sector. And so we were all made redundant, basically, which was a shame, but it was still a brilliant, exciting idea for a radio station that probably was 10 years ahead.
I was going to say, it sounds quite ahead of its time. Yeah.
But my husband had gone to set up his own business, and he had set up a restaurant business called Fine Burger, and it was a premium restaurant business, but he wasn't a natural restaurateur. His best friend was a restaurateur. My husband was the publisher, actually, of The Enemy and Loaded, but he's an entrepreneur, and they were really struggling because they were both entrepreneurs. So all an entrepreneur thinks about is the gap, see a gap, fill a gap, very forward focused. And he would come home a lot moaning about how, his team were rubbish and nobody could run the business. And they were turning over about £5 or £6 million a year. They had about 12 restaurants. Now, I'd been to Glastonbury with the BBC for 3 years running, and I had arrived when no bands were there. It was basically fields, and we would set up, dozens of cameras, the whole backstage production area. We would then be responsible for hundreds of hours of live TV and interviews and radio. And it's basically just a question of writing a big list and ticking everything off as you go along. All right. And so I couldn't understand how him running, a dozen restaurants was that difficult. And I said to him, it can't be as difficult as you make out. I've been in really difficult environments, and it's just a question of organisation. And because I'd been made redundant, I said, let me come and work with you for the summer and help you get organised, because I'm a producer by nature. And I'm a communicator. And the thing I noticed when I got into his business is there was a real lack of communication. What we needed to do was to create the story of the business. So it was a communications job, really. And because he was an entrepreneur, he'd set up restaurants, but we used to go to loads of music events, and I remember sitting in a field in 2002 just saying how rubbish the food was. And nobody at that point had ever really cooked to order at a festival. So he actually got a big food truck backstage at V Festival to see if people would wait for 2 or 3 minutes and pay, £5 or £6 for a properly cooked burger rather than £2.50 for a piece of carpet. And they did. And so the next summer he had about 10 units. And he really was one of the early instigators of the street food movement in London, because of the way he didn't see any barriers to doing really good quality, freshly cooked food in a field, because nobody was doing that. And he really interrupted that market. And that's what he was really good at. He was really rubbish at getting all the staff to a festival and getting them back from a festival and making sure everyone knew what they were doing and writing pitch documents to win new work. And so that's what I was really good at, is putting those structures into the business. And so the summer turned into 10 years. Mm-hmm. So from 2008 to 2018, we worked together, and it was hard work. But it was good fun, and we really grew the business and we expanded. So we had an event catering division, we had restaurants, and we had these quality quick service kiosks, one of which is still at St Pancras Station, and one is at Excel. And then in 2017, when the Brexit vote was announced, it became obvious to us that most of our staff were European. Lots of people who work in the hospitality industry come over for a year or two to get their English better, or to do to study, and then they work 20 hours a week. And that was our staff. We had a really multicultural workforce. There were Italians, there was Spanish, there was French people, there was Indians, there was Polish. All of that. We knew all of those people would not stay once Brexit happened, and that all of our suppliers would suffer. And so we made the decision to sell our business, and we were really lucky because we sold it to a very, very big American company. And we laughed that we'd sold burgers back to the Americans. I got hoovered up into this big American company to be the UK Director of Marketing and Communications, which was a fascinating experience. But after about 18 months, I don't think I'm a big company person, and it wasn't challenging to me. And I think people that work in large companies find it really hard to do things differently, because there's so much jeopardy for somebody. If they try something and get it wrong, they'll lose their job, they'll lose their they'll use their pension, they'll lose their great healthcare plan. So there's no real incentive for people in large companies to stick their head above the parapet and speak up and do things differently, because they're the ones that will carry the can and get kicked out as soon as the bottom line drops. There's no real move fast and break things mentality in a large company. They're like super tankers. So then I ended up thinking, right, now's the time to go and do my master's degree at Bayes. And for me, coming to university to do a master's degree at the end of my career, towards the end or the middle of my career, was a really reflective exercise, because I could think back on all of the experiences that I'd had in the workplace and see how these, the sort of thing that Peter Drucker would say is borne out by my actual lived experience. So that lovely Peter Drucker quote about strategy, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's absolutely true. It doesn't matter what you plan or what you think you're going to do. If you don't take your people with you, the people that are running your company, that are interacting with your customers, then you'll never achieve anything. You have to spend an awful lot of time looking after your people, listening to them, including them, getting their ideas in, making them feel empowered enough to donate their ideas to you in the first place. It's really important. And I think that's what big companies lose, because big companies rely on framework and structure. So they lose the psychological safety and the culture that actually would give them more of an edge. So that was my journey, and that's what brings me to you. And when I reflect on it, because I have, when I agreed to do this podcast, I was reflecting on it, and I was thinking, so what's the connection between starting out as a music journalist and ending up developing AI tools around creativity? And I think for me, it's about being where the cultural conversation is. And that's what's always interested me. What is the cultural cutting edge? Where are we? And that's, music was that in the 80s, and AI is that right now.
Interesting. I wrote that down when you said it, as this idea of where the cultural conversation is, and I can tell that you've done a lot of that reflection on how everything kind of pieces together to bring you to where you are now. And it makes a lot of sense that being at the forefront of where these interesting conversations are happening.
So I think that's what's guided me in my career, which is just to be interested and curious and to go where my curiosity takes me.
Yeah.
With the one exception of working with my husband for 10 years, because I did that to help him out in the industry that he had chosen.
And I'm interested then how you're finding life now in a university, the skills that you're using, how it's fitting into this concept of where you want your life to be.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that I'm in a business university, so I can use my business skills, and that was the bit that interested me about the research project, because it's a knowledge exchange project.
Yeah,
and in all my life, I had never heard the words knowledge exchange until I got to university. Because when we were running our company, it would never have occurred to me to go towards the higher education sector for any kind of advice or
collaborations or
consultancy.
Yeah.
Just wouldn't have occurred to me. And so I was really interested in why that was and how I could help to free up these academic ideas and get them into the commercial sector. And part of me thinks that it's always a communications issue. I do think that academics speak a really weird, arcane language.
Yes, definitely.
And they don't necessarily always think of the bottom line. The commercial sector just talks in numbers all the time, and that really annoys me, because I think that profit is it's the fumes that come out of the tank. It's not the petrol that you put in the tank. And actually the most important things in business are to get the people, the culture, the organization, the structure, the product right. But the price, the profit margins, all of that stuff is the things that people absolutely obsess over. And actually they follow great structure and great organizations. So academics rarely think about finances, and the commercial sector think about finances all the time.
So you're kind of sandwiched in the middle there.
And what I'm trying to do, I suppose, is build an interface for this 5-pin academic plug to plug into the 3-pin commercial sector. How do we do it? And that's the bit I've enjoyed, because again, it's a piece of storytelling. How are we going to position this applied research in such a way that a company is going to say, wow, that's what we need in our business? And it's hard because a research centre is funded and has a lot of tick boxes. So there needs to be white papers, there needs to be research, and there needs to be impact. But they also need to be creating products that people want to buy or license. So trying to hit all of those is an interesting puzzle, and I'm really enjoying the puzzling of it, actually. And I'm lucky because it's a very large, well-funded. We were funded for 4 years. It's very well supported by the academic enterprise department. I get a lot of support in the university, and actually I get a lot of respect because the academics I work with respect the fact that I've got commercial experience and they don't, and that's quite nice. So it's an enjoyable experience.
Excellent.
And I don't know where it leads. My husband keeps saying to me, "What are you going to do when the funding ends next September?" And hopefully we will started to generate income from the activities that we'll be building. But I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm going to, and that's all. I hate planning ahead. I don't know why. I'm not one of those people that writes down 5 things that I need to do by the time I'm blah. I'm a much more of an opportunist. I've always believed that if you give your best, you do your best, whether it's brilliant or not, just do the best you can do, you will get somewhere. And then at that point where you have to make a decision and move.
Yeah.
So I'm not a long-term planner, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Oh, well, we need to keep an eye on time here. It's been such an interesting conversation. I wonder if I could ask you, I like to ask all my guests this question, which is, if you had a magic wand, is there something that you would change about the world that you find yourself working in now?
Well, it's interesting because you did send me that question to think about beforehand. And it's a hard question for me because I just said I'm an opportunist.
Yeah.
So, and I don't seek to change the world I live in. I seek to change myself in response to the situations I find myself in. You know, I'm a bit Buddhist in that respect. But if I had a magic wand, what would I change? I think I would change education and early years experience, because we need to make schools great places for creativity and exploration and confidence building, because those are the human tools that we need to leverage these AI opportunities that are coming towards us. You know, we need diversity of thought. We need to really build inclusivity, and all of this stuff can happen at school. And then we've got these brilliant thinkers for the future. But in the UK and in most of the Western world, we're absolutely crushing the creativity out of our children. There's a research project, I think, that's going on in America that is studying creativity levels in school children, and preschoolers score about 90% on these Torrens creativity tests. By the time that they're 10 years old and they apply the tests again, creativity has dropped to like 40%.
Oh, goodness.
Within 4 years of early years education, by the time students are graduating, their creativity levels are less than 10%, because what we're teaching is industrial era thinking. You know, it's preparing people to work on a factory line or typing letters in an office, and that's just not relevant anymore.
No,
we need to think much more creatively. We need to encourage creative thinking. We need to get away from the Govian school ethos. And so I think that would make a big difference. Make schools really safe, happy, well-funded places where we can create safe, happy, you know, well-rounded young adults for the next generation.
I mean, that would be amazing. I think it would make such a difference as well to, as you say, about culture, you know, and how people show up in the world and how we interact with each other. So definite magic wand granted for that one. So,
Thank you.
So I wonder if we could, we'll bring our conversation to a close now, but if anybody would like to get in touch with you, where's the best place to find you?
Probably on LinkedIn, actually. I'm sorry, you can hear my dog in the background woofing because he wants to go out. So we will have to wrap it up.
My dog's been doing exactly the same.
But yeah, LinkedIn, Sam Steele, I think, on LinkedIn.
I'll get a link and put it in the show notes.
Put it in the show notes. I used to live on Twitter, but honestly, Twitter's really no fun anymore.
No.
So LinkedIn is where I do most of my online living.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I feel like we can't hold the dog from his walk anymore. So we will end our conversation there. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a real pleasure. To come along.
Thank you for asking, Sarah. I really appreciate your interest.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links under the episode to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the Research Adjacent Roundup newsletter. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.